Good evening, everybody. Dear Professor Sandel, dear Michael, dear students, dear colleagues, dear friends, mesdames et messieurs, it's really my pleasure to welcome you tonight for the opening keynote lecture of the academic year. Differentiation and integration are two defining dynamics of human life. The balance, though, between those two dynamics has varied significantly across time and space. On the one hand, we find in humanity the need to affirm a singularity, a difference, and differentiation implies the affirmation of the individual. On the other hand, humans need to belong, to connect, and to conform, to share in a community, in the group. Social scientists, and in particular sociologists, have long explored the dynamics that have led to a rebalancing over the last 200 years or so. From community to society, in the words of Ferdinand Tönnies, from organic to mechanical solidarity, to cite Émile Durkheim, or the Great Transformation, as Karl Polanyi called this movement. One of the marks of modernity, or even of modernities, if we want to be a bit less Eurocentric, is the more or less rapid progress of differentiation and individualism in a given society, with, in parallel, the more or less significant weakening of integration and community belonging. The progress of the division of labor, including in its international dimension, and of the marketization and contractualization of nearly everything, of which obviously Professor Sandel so aptly talked in his 2012 book, What Money Can Buy, The Moral Limits of Market, have been major carriers of this significant societal transformation towards ever-increasing differentiation and individualism. The balancing act is delicate, and many social scientists, including, in fact, the father of modern economics, Adam Smith, have warned us of the dangers. We need to read or reread Adam Smith's Theory of Moral Sentiments, a book that he wrote well before his famous opus, The Wealth of Nations. Only then do we understand that while self-love is indeed for Adam Smith an important motor of market dynamics, self-love should be framed and tamed, he tells us, through another defining principle of our human nature, fellow feeling. And the balance between both should be moderated by what he calls the impartial spectator, a kind of hybrid in this 1759 book between the fear of God, peer pressure, and the legal system. If that moderation is not sufficient, Adam Smith tells us, then society and markets will crash and crumble with a host of disastrous consequences. For Émile Durkheim, the extreme development of differentiation and individualism in any society, without in parallel the stabilization of new forms of solidarity, will inexorably lead to what he calls anomie. Anomie can be defined as the breakdown of our collective glue, of the community and social bonds that hold us together. One of the many direct and measurable consequences of the progress of anomie, as Durkheim scientifically showed and convincingly argued, is a significant increase in rates of suicide. Another consequence of anomie, which is being currently underscored and explored by many scientific studies, is the progress of structural forms of loneliness, with associated ills emerging from this for individuals, but also for societies and countries. Loneliness has been shown to increase psychological and physical health problems, to reduce the capacity to find a job, and hence to ensure economic and social integration. And in her 1951 book, The Origins of Totalitarianism, the philosopher Hannah Arendt went even further, affirming that loneliness could be at the roots of our fall into totalitarianism. Let me read here what is a stunningly modern text. What prepares man for totalitarian domination in the non-totalitarian world is the fact that loneliness, once a borderline experience, usually suffered in certain marginal social conditions like old age, has become an everyday experience. The preparation has succeeded when people have lost contact with their fellow men as well as with the reality around them. For together with these contacts, men lose the capacity of both experience and thought. Structural loneliness, hence Hannah Arendt tells us, makes us ideal subjects of totalitarian rule. Some of you may be wondering where I'm going with this and what all this has to do with the keynote lecture that we are about to listen to. So let me now make the connection. We have the great chance today to welcome Professor Michael Sandel. Professor in the government department at Harvard, Michael Sandel is one of the world's most distinguished political philosophers. Madame Beth Krasna, president of the foundation board of the Geneva Graduate Institute, will be presenting him more fully in a minute. Today, Professor Sandel will talk from his latest book, The Tyranny of Merit. But the title of his talk for today makes an interesting connection between merit on the one hand and the common good on the other. So I read the title, The Tyranny of Merit. Can we find the common good? Merit is an important structuring feature of our contemporary societies. In light of my rapid introduction, we can in fact also identify merit as an important mechanism of the trend towards differentiation and therefore individualism in our modern societies. Therefore, when does too much merit becomes detrimental to the type of balancing act that I've been talking about? At what point do we need to bring back a focus on integration and therefore on the common good? And how will we be able to do this today? Andrew Carnegie, one of the infamous 19th century American robber barons, wrote in 1889 a short text titled Wealth and renamed a bit later The Gospel of Wealth. This text soon became the roadbook of 20th century American philanthropy, and it's still highly influential in that community. In this text, Andrew Carnegie identified the potentially highly disruptive consequences of a logic of merit in the form of extreme structural inequalities. And here is how he proposed to reconcile merit and its risks with the need for integration and common good. I quote, "There remains then only one mode of using great fortunes, but in this we have the true antidote for the temporary unequal distribution of wealth, the reconciliation of the rich and the poor, a reign of harmony. Another ideal, differing indeed from that of the communist in requiring only the further evolution of existing conditions, not the total overthrow of our civilization. It is founded upon the present most intense individualism. Under its sway, we shall have an ideal state in which the surplus wealth of the few will become, in the best sense, the property of the many, because administered for the common good. Even the poorest can be made to agree that great sums gathered by some of their fellow citizens and spent for public purposes are more valuable to them than if scattered among them through the course of many years in trifling amounts. I'm naturally convinced that Professor Sandel's proposal for rebalancing will be very different from Carnegie's. And just like you, probably, I'm waiting with great expectation for the answer to the question he gave himself, can we find the common good? Through the years, Professor Sandel's many books and contributions have been lifting our veil of ignorance on some of the structuring pillars of our contemporary society: freedom, markets, justice, and therefore, most recently, merit. His exploration of these foundational institutional pillars is at the same time a powerful commentary on our contemporary society and its ills. He has built, through the years, a very important toolbox for the critical assessment of our current life and institutional choices. And in the process, he has made it possible to envision and explore alternatives and to enter the path of realist utopia that the urgency of contemporary challenges is clearly calling for. It is therefore a great chance for our community to start the academic year with such a broad and systemic commentary on the world as it is and as it could be. The kind of political philosophy that is deployed by Professor Sandel is profoundly aligned with our own intellectual identity at the Geneva Graduate Institute: critical thinking, integrated transdisciplinarity, and a constructive projection towards common good challenges and a better world. Before leaving the floor to Professor Sandel, however, I would like now to call to the stage Madame Beth Krasna, President of the Foundation Board of the Institute.
Dear Professor Sandel, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to welcome you to the award ceremony of the 2022 Edgar de Picciotto International Prize. This prize was created as a tribute and a token of thanks to Mr. Edgar de Picciotto, who has brought, with his family, an extremely generous contribution to the realization of the Edgar and Danielle de Picciotto Student House that hosts students from around the world. The Edgar de Picciotto International Prize, awarded every 2 years, is intended to reward an internationally renowned academic whose research has contributed to the understanding of global challenges and whose work has influenced policymakers. The prize was awarded for the first time in 2012 to Amartya Sen, 1998 winner of the Nobel Prize for Economics. In 2014, it was awarded to Saul Friedlander, emeritus professor at the University of California, Los Angeles, and recipient of the 2008 Pritzker Prize. In 2016, it was awarded to Paul Krugman, winner of the 2008 Nobel Prize in Economics, and in 2018 to Joan Wallach Scott, emerita professor at the Institute for Advanced Studies at Princeton University. In 2020, it was awarded to Saskia Sassen, Robert S. Lind Professor of Sociology at Columbia University. For those of you who have not Googled him, Professor Sandel is a graduate of Brandeis University. He received his doctorate from Oxford University, where he was a Rhodes Scholar. He holds honorary degrees from both Utrecht University in the Netherlands and Brandeis University. In the US, he has served on the President's Council on Bioethics and is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Science. His teaching career was recognized in 2008 by the American Political Science Association. Dear Professor Sandel, you're one of the most influential modern-day political philosophers, a leading advocate of communitarian theory, a current that emerged in the late 20th century, contrary to individualistic and liberal stances. You have managed to extend thinking on this subject to a global audience, posing ethical questions in open public debates in which you foster dialogue among the audience. Your book writings on justice, ethics, democracy, and markets have been translated into 27 languages. You have been an influential participant in the public debate using new technology to promote global public discourse. In your BBC series, The Global Philosophers, you led video-linked discussions with participants from over 30 countries on the ethical aspects of issues such as immigration and climate change. Your global lectures have taken you across 5 continents and packed venues such as St. Paul's Cathedral in London, the Sydney Opera House in Australia, the Public Theatre in New York Central Park, and an outdoor stadium in Seoul where 14,000 people came to hear you speak. Your course, Justice, is the first Harvard course to be made freely available online and on television. It has been viewed by tens of millions of people around the world, including in China, where you were named the most influential foreign figure of the year. For all of these reasons, we are extremely pleased to award you the 2022 Edgar de Picciotto International Prize. Joe, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, thank you, President Krasnov, for those very warm words of introduction. Thank you, Director Saul, for inviting me, and to the Foundation Board for this award, by which I'm deeply honored. and thanks to all of you for coming to have a discussion about what's gone wrong with democracy in our civic life today, and what it might have to do with the way we think about success. Now, I'm going to speak today about the tyranny of merit, which I acknowledge is a paradoxical phrase. We normally think of merit as an ideal, as an aspiration, as something to aim at. If I need surgery, I want a well-qualified surgeon to perform it. That's merit. If I'm flying in an airplane, I want a well-qualified pilot at the controls. So how could merit, assigning people to social roles for which they're qualified, that's a good thing, how could merit become a kind of tyranny? And what does all of this have to do with the state of democracy today, with the clouds of danger and peril that hang over democratic public life? That's what I would like to try to diagnose and explain, and see what you make of it. To see how merit can become a kind of tyranny, we have to look back over the last 4 decades and ask what brought us to this polarized, rancorous political moment. For decades, the divide between winners and losers has been deepening, poisoning our politics, setting us apart. Now, this has partly to do with widening inequalities of income and wealth, but it's not only that. It has also to do with changing attitudes towards success that have accompanied the rising inequalities. Those who've landed on top have come to believe that their success is their own doing, the measure of their merit, and that they therefore deserve the full bounty that the market bestows upon them, and by implication, that those who struggle, those left behind, must deserve their fate as well. This way of thinking about success arises from a seemingly attractive principle, the principle of merit, the idea that insofar as everyone starts out with an equal chance, the winners deserve their winnings. They've earned it. This is the heart of the meritocratic ideal. There are 2 problems with meritocracy. One is that we fall short of it. We don't live up to the meritocratic principles we profess. Not everyone has an equal chance to rise. Children born to poor parents tend to stay poor when they grow up. Affluent parents have figured out how to pass their advantages onto their kids. There's a temptation to think, and the temptation is historically quite strong in the United States, that we don't need to worry so much about inequality because our answer to inequality is mobility, individual upward mobility. If no person is consigned to the fate of their birth, if people are free to move up and down the income scale, then, we often told ourselves, we don't have to worry so much about inequality. In Europe, Americans traditionally thought they have to worry about inequality because those are class-ridden societies. There isn't the same kind of mobility. But in America, it's possible to rise. But in fact, it isn't so easy to rise in the United States. In fact, it's harder than in many of those countries in old Europe today to rise. social mobility rates, intergenerational social mobility rates, are not that impressive in the United States. In Denmark, for example, the number of generations it takes for someone born into a low-income family, bottom 20%, to rise to the median income is 2 generations. In Finland, Norway, and Sweden, it takes 3. In Canada and the Netherlands, it takes 4 generations. In the United States, and in Switzerland, by the way, it takes 5. It takes 5. So one might conclude from this that the American dream is alive and well and living in Copenhagen. So that's one problem. We don't live up to the meritocratic ideal. But there's a further problem, a deeper problem. And that's this: the ideal itself is flawed. It's flawed for 3 reasons. 2 of them are philosophical reasons, moral flaws in the meritocratic ideal. The third is a political failing. Let me first mention the philosophical flaws. Now, one way to think about this is to use a concrete example about who gets rewarded in a meritocratic society, even one that works, even one where there is genuine equality of opportunity. Think, for example, think back to the best, most inspiring teacher you had in school. In fact, I suspect you can probably remember the name of that teacher. I can, even though it's been a while. Can most of you, how many can remember the name of your most influential teacher in school? Almost everyone. Now, how much did that teacher get paid? Or how much does a school teacher get paid today? In Switzerland, what would it be? Just call it out. What is the average pay of a teacher? Does anybody know? 120? Between 80 to 120. Yeah? All right, now think. People are discussing whether that figure is accurate. You think it's higher? What would you say?
The number?
Yeah.
A friend's mom is a piano teacher in a public school.
Yeah.
He has 200,000.
200,000 for teaching piano in the public schools. Wow. Yeah? Are you the piano teacher? No. In Switzerland? In Italy, it's less. All right. Now, all right, but we have the range. We have the range. Now, let's think about someone who makes a vast income. We could think of Wall Street bankers, we could think of hedge fund managers, but let's take a highly paid athlete. Roger Federer. How much does he make in a year playing tennis and endorsing products? How much do you think? 20 million? 50 million? It's around 90 million, according to what I read. And that was in a year recently when he was injured. He didn't pay. A lot of it comes from endorsements. Now, here's the question, thinking about what counts as valuable. How many think that Roger Federer, great and admirable though he is, how many think that he deserves to make 1,000 times more than your best school teacher? Just by a show of hands. There's one very enthusiastic hand went out. There's a young man with a tennis racket next to him. How many don't think so? That he doesn't deserve to make 1,000 times more. Now, most people in the room think that he doesn't. And if we had, it'd be interesting to have a discussion about why people think that and the majority think he doesn't. Well, just tell us why you think he does. I'm curious.
Okay, well, I mean, he's a world-known athlete, and basically, a billion people know about him, and who knows how many kids have watched him and dreamt of becoming a professional tennis player just because he was so good.
Yeah.
And I think that he probably changed more lives than my favorite teachers.
He probably changed more lives than your favorite teacher.
Positively
Or had a bigger impact on more lives because he's so famous, so many people watch him and derive inspiration from his success. And what's your name?
Warren.
And who was your favorite high school teacher?
It was this Italian math professor in my high school called Alessandro.
Yeah. So you think that Roger Federer had a bigger impact than your Italian math teacher, Alessandro. Great a teacher, though he was. But 1,000 times more? Well, if you're measuring how many people know of him, probably more than 1,000 times. And it's an interesting question whether he inspired more people than school teachers do. Now, for those of you who voted that he doesn't deserve 1,000 times more, as the market measure of his contribution would seem to reflect, I can imagine at least a couple of reasons why you might think that. Well, a few reasons. You might think he had various advantages in life. His upbringing, encouragement, support, access to training facilities and good equipment and good nutrition, and not everybody in the world has access to those opportunities, whether in sports or in other domains of life. But the harder question comes when we ask, suppose that he did, because in a perfect meritocratic society, everyone would have a truly equal chance. Everyone would start the race at the same starting line, with good training, good coaches, good preparation, strong support, encouragement, good nutrition, and the like. But even in such a society, in a society with truly equal opportunity, you might still say, well, he doesn't deserve to make 1,000 times more than the teacher, for the following reason. If you imagine this fair race, and you imagine social life as a fair competition, even if everyone had truly equal opportunity, who would win the race? The most gifted runner, which is a matter of talent. And talent, being a gifted athlete, that's a gift. Now, it's true, Federer had to work long and hard. He had to practice to cultivate his athletic gifts. That's true. But effort is not a sufficient condition for his great achievements. I could practice tennis day and night, longer than Federer, and never be a great, I think never even be a good tennis player. So even if everyone starts the race at the same starting point, it's predictable that the winners will be the most gifted. And so once we start to think about talent, it's hard to say that people deserve the talents with which they're endowed. And because after all, that's a matter of luck. It's Federer's good luck. Yes, he practiced hard, but it's his good luck that he was a gifted athlete. And so it's hard to say that people deserve all of the benefits that flow from talent insofar as talent is a matter of luck. There's a further reason to question whether those who make a lot of money deserve to make that much more than a school teacher. Not only is he fortunate to have great athletic gifts, isn't he also fortunate to live in a society and at a time when people love tennis? And also coffee makers, I suppose. That's not his doing either. If Federer had lived back in the days of Renaissance Florence, he might have been as great a tennis player as he is now, but it wouldn't have gotten him all that much. They didn't care about tennis back then. They cared more about fresco painters. So having the talents that enable us to succeed in reaping great market rewards, and living in a society at a time when there's great demand for the talents we happen to have, neither of those is one's own doing. Both of those are matters of luck. So the philosophical flaw, the moral flaw in the meritocratic idea that people deserve the rewards they get by exercising their talents in a market society is that having those talents and having them be prized is a matter of good fortune, not our own doing. But there is a further, beyond these philosophical objections, there is a further objection that is broadly to do, I call it the social and political objection. This has to do with the attitudes toward success that meritocratic societies promote. Those who wind up on top come to believe that their success is their own doing, but this brings out the dark side of meritocracy, this attitude. It leads to what I call meritocratic hubris. By meritocratic hubris, I mean the tendency of the successful to inhale too deeply of their success, to forget the luck and good fortune that helped them on their way, to forget their indebtedness to those who make their achievements, our achievements, possible. Parents, teachers, coaches, family, neighborhoods, communities, countries, the times in which we live. The belief that we are self-making, that our success is our own doing, leads us to forget the role of luck in life and also our indebtedness. Hence meritocratic hubris. Now, why does this matter politically? It's morally unattractive, this meritocratic hubris. But it also deepens the divide between winners and losers. It's corrosive of the common good. That's the political problem with meritocracy. And this is how meritocracy, even when it's fully realized, can become a kind of tyranny because it's corrosive of the common good, of solidarity. Now, one way to address the divide between winners and losers that we see in our society, that we experience, is to say, well, let's level the playing field so that everyone has a truly equal chance to become a winner. But this project, we should try to level the playing field, but this cannot heal the inequalities of esteem that meritocracies produce. Because even if we could somehow achieve truly equal opportunity for everyone, the divide between winners and losers would persist. The real problem lies in the image of social life as a competitive race, a race in which the successful believe, and have reason to believe, that they have earned their success and the benefits that flow from it. Paradoxically, the closer we come to achieving true equality of opportunity, the more plausible it seems to those who succeed and to those who struggle that the winners have earned their success and so deserve its rewards. This argument, the argument about the corrosive effect on social esteem and solidarity, this argument against meritocracy was raised by Michael Young, the British sociologist who coined the term meritocracy. He did so in a book in 1958 called The Rise of the Meritocracy. And although we have come to regard meritocracy as an ideal, Young, the writer who coined the term, considered it a dystopia. He warned of the hubris that a meritocracy would breed among the successful, and of the demoralization that it would inflict on those who didn't rise. In recent decades, the meritocratic way of thinking about success has gained prominence in public discourse, even as neoliberal globalization brought widening inequality. These two tendencies are connected. It is as if, well, let me put it this way. Market-driven globalization created widening inequalities, but meritocratic attitudes toward success created the divide between winners and losers. It is as if the winners of globalization want more than the winnings. What more could they want? They want to believe that they deserve the outsized share of income and wealth that 4 decades of deregulation and financialization and neoliberal economic policies have brought them. Max Weber was on to this tendency of the successful a century ago. He wrote, "The fortunate person is seldom satisfied with the fact of being fortunate. Beyond this, he needs to know that he has a right to his good fortune. He wants to be convinced that he deserves it, and above all, that he deserves it in comparison with others. He wishes to be allowed the belief that the less fortunate also merely experience their due." Now, Weber was reflecting on the religious conviction that worldly success is a sign of God's favor, and that suffering is a punishment for sin. But we've transposed this way of thinking, which has a religious origin, into secular terms, into our way of interpreting market success in largely, but not entirely, secular societies. Now, how do we see this? Well, we see it if we look at the terms of public discourse over the past 4 decades. Politicians from the center right and the center left, mainstream politicians and parties, responded to the widening inequalities of the age of globalization, not by addressing the structural inequalities, not by rethinking the economic policies that brought about these inequalities, but instead by offering those who struggled a bracing piece of advice. And the advice was this. If you're worried about wage stagnation and job loss due to outsourcing, what you should do is improve yourself by getting a university degree. What you earn will depend on what you learn. This was a slogan that Bill Clinton offered time and time again. You can make it if you try. This was a slogan that Barack Obama articulated hundreds of times in speeches. The mainstream parties and the elites who delivered this message, I call it the rhetoric of rising, were offering individual upward mobility through higher education as a response to inequality. But what they failed to notice was the insult implicit in their advice. The insult was this: if you didn't go to university, and if you're struggling in the new economy, your failure must be your fault. So it's no wonder that many working people turned against meritocratic elites. Those of us who spend our days in the company of the credentialed can easily forget a simple fact. Most people don't have a university degree. In the US, nearly 2/3 do not, and the figure is similar in most European countries. So it's folly to create an economy that makes a university diploma a necessary condition of dignified work and a decent life. Elites have, during this period, so valorized a university degree, both as an avenue for advancement and as a basis for social esteem. They've so valorized a university degree that they have difficulty understanding the hubris a meritocracy can generate. And they miss the harsh judgment it imposes on those who haven't gone to university. And yet, this harsh judgment is precisely what accounts for much of the anger and resentment and sense of grievance among working people, grievance against elites that fueled the populist backlash against elites, including the election of Donald Trump, including the vote for Brexit in the UK, including the rise of right-wing populist parties inveighing against elites in many European countries. So this is how even a realized meritocracy generates a kind of polarization and sense of grievance that contributes to the backlash that now is threatening the future of democracy itself. If I'm right in this diagnosis, if meritocratic attitudes toward success have deepened the divide between winners and losers, if individual mobility through higher education is too feeble a response to inequalities of income and wealth, if the rhetoric of rising has become, for many, less a promise than a taunt, what should we do? We should begin by acknowledging that mobility cannot compensate for inequality. And you can see why if you take the image that figures in meritocratic rhetoric of a ladder. Meritocracy is about enabling people to compete to climb up the ladder of success. So you're not stuck at the bottom if that's where you were born. But what it misses and neglects is that the rungs on the ladder are growing further and further apart. Any serious response to the gap between the rich and the rest must therefore reckon directly with inequalities of wealth and power, rather than rest content with the project of helping people scramble up a ladder, even as the ladder grows steeper. This requires shifting the terms of public discourse. Broadly speaking, we should focus less on arming people for meritocratic competition and focus more on affirming the dignity of work. We should ask what policies would ensure that those who don't have advanced degrees or fancy credentials, those who don't inhabit the privileged ranks of the professional classes, can find work that enables them to support a family, contribute to their community, and win social recognition for doing so. Part of the solution requires rethinking the role of higher education. We've converted, during this meritocratic age, universities into the arbiters of opportunity. They are the institutions that confer the credentials and define the merit that a market-driven meritocracy rewards. But converting universities into sorting machines entrenches inequality, because affluent parents have figured out how to pass their privilege onto their children, not by bequeathing them vast estates in the old days or trust funds, but by equipping them to compete successfully in the meritocratic tournament that determines who gets admission to top colleges and universities. It's important to broaden access to higher education to those who can't afford it. But it's also important to lower the stakes of the frenzied competition to get in. And this means investing more than we currently do, certainly than we do in the United States, in those forms of learning that most people rely on to prepare themselves for the world of work and of citizenship. Switzerland and Germany do better than we do in the Anglo-American world in promoting and funding and honoring vocational and technical training and apprenticeships. The failure of many of our societies to do this not only constricts economic opportunity for those who don't aspire to a university degree, it also reflects the meritocratic priorities, I would say the credentialist prejudices of those who govern. Because one expression of the age of meritocracy is that although 60 to 70% of our fellow citizens don't have a university diploma, very few who don't have a diploma now find their way to serve in the institutions of representative government. In the United States Congress, for example, 95% of the members of the House of Representatives and all senators have university degrees. Over half of the senators are lawyers, and many have advanced degrees. And something similar is true in Britain and in European parliaments. The rising tide of credentialism has transformed the composition of representative government. In Britain, there's been a precipitous decline in the last 40 years in working class MPs who, in 1979, 41% of Labour MPs did not have a university degree. By 2017, only 16% did not have a university degree. And if you look at the percentage of working class members of parliament as a whole, only 4% in the UK. In Germany, France, the Netherlands, and Belgium, representative government has also become almost exclusively the preserve of the highly credentialed. Even in rich countries such as these, about 70% of the adult population does not have a university degree, but very few of them, only around 12 to 15% in these countries, find their way into parliament. This is not unprecedented, but it's more than a little troubling to notice that we've reverted to the way things were with representative government before most working people had the right to vote. The highly credentialed profile of today's parliaments resembles the one that prevailed in the late 19th century, when property qualifications still limited the right to vote. In Germany, France, the Netherlands, and Belgium, most members of mid to late 19th century parliaments did have university degrees, but then this changed in the 20th century with the advent of universal suffrage and with the rise of socialist and social democratic parties. From the 1920s to the 1950s, MPs without university degrees served in substantial numbers, accounting for 1/3 to 1/2 of legislators. But beginning in the 60s and 70s, this began to change, and by the 2000s, non-university graduates were as rare in the parliaments of Europe as they were in the days of aristocrats and the landed gentry. Now, you might say, well, isn't that a good thing? Don't we want well-educated university graduates to govern? Just as I want the well-qualified surgeon to perform my appendectomy. Don't we want elected representatives who attended the best universities? Aren't they more likely than those with less distinguished credentials to give us sound public policies and reasoned public discourse? Well, no, not necessarily. Even a cursory glance at the state of political discourse in the US Congress or in the parliaments of Europe should give us pause. Governing well requires practical wisdom and civic virtue, not just technocratic expertise. It requires an ability to identify with one's fellow citizens. It requires an ability to deliberate about the common good and to pursue it effectively. But are these capacities developed all that well in universities today? I'm not so sure. At best, recent historical experience suggests little correlation between the capacity for political judgment, which involves moral character, as well as expertise. Little correlation between that kind of judgment and the ability to score well on standardized tests and to win admission to elite universities. The idea that the best and the brightest are better at governing than their less credentialed fellow citizens is a myth born of the same meritocratic hubris that leads the successful to believe they deserve what the market bestows upon their talents. Which brings us back to the failure of mainstream parties and politicians to address the rampant inequality of recent decades. But that inequality is not the only problem. The income gap was not the only source of grievance and anger and resentment. This sense of grievance was compounded by a more insidious injury than economic inequality alone: the erosion of the dignity of work and the social esteem connected to it. By valorizing the so-called brains it takes to score well on university admissions tests, the sorting machine disparages those without meritocratic credentials. It tells them that the work they do, less valued by the market than the work of well-paid professionals, is a lesser contribution to the common good, and so less worthy of social and recognition and esteem. This is why animating the populist backlash against elites is a sense among many working people that elites look down on them. It's not only universities that have abetted the erosion of the dignity of work. The financialization of the economy has reinforced this demoralizing, disparaging message. As economic activity has shifted from making things to managing money, as society has heaped enormous rewards on hedge fund managers and Wall Street bankers, the esteem accorded work in the traditional sense, has become fragile and uncertain. At a time when finance has claimed a growing share of corporate profits, many who labor in the real economy, producing useful goods and services, have faced not only stagnant wages and uncertain job prospects, they've also come to feel that society accords less respect to the kind of work the working class does. This way of thinking about who deserves what is not morally defensible. But over the last several decades, we've slid into the assumption that the money people make is the measure of their contribution to the common good. It is as if we have outsourced our moral judgment about whose contributions really matter. We've outsourced that moral judgment to markets, even though, as we saw from the poll we took at the beginning, the market's verdict on what counts as a valuable contribution to the common good is open to doubt. So to contend with inequality and to address the polarization that afflicts our public life, we need to reconsider meritocratic attitudes towards success and technocratic neoliberal conceptions of the common good. Now, we could discuss, and perhaps we will in the discussion, what proposals, what concrete measures we might undertake to renew the dignity of work and to call into question the meritocratic hubris that these attitudes towards success promote. But my broader point is this: renewing the dignity of work requires reclaiming from markets the moral question of what counts as a valuable contribution to the common good, reclaiming that question, that judgment as democratic citizens. We need, in other words, to contend more directly with the moral questions underlying our economic arrangements, questions that the technocratic politics of recent decades have obscured. One such question is what kinds of work are worthy of recognition and esteem. Another is what we owe one another as citizens. These questions are connected because we can't really discuss or determine what counts as a contribution worth affirming without reasoning together about the purposes and ends of the common life we share. And we can't deliberate about common purposes and ends without a sense of belonging, without seeing ourselves as members of a community to which we are indebted. Over the past 4 decades, market-driven globalization and the meritocratic conception of success together have unraveled the ties, the moral and civic bonds that hold our societies together. Global supply chains, capital flows, and the cosmopolitan identities they fostered made us less reliant on our fellow citizens, less grateful for the work they do, and therefore less open to the claims of solidarity. Meritocratic sorting taught us that our success is our own doing, that we are self-made and self-sufficient. And this too eroded our sense of indebtedness and mutual responsibility. We are now in the midst of the angry whirlwind this unraveling has produced. To renew our civic life, we must repair the social bonds that the age of merit has undone. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. What a very refreshing way to start an academic year, by putting on the question chair the university, this place that we are in. I think this is a wonderful set of food for thoughts. And so the common good we are looking for is solidarity. This is what I'm understanding you to say. This is what we are looking for.
Yes. And so the practical question is, what social practices and what public policies and what ways of engaging in public debate can counteract these tendencies? And that requires rethinking the neoliberal version of globalization that created the deepening inequality. And it requires rethinking meritocratic ideas of success and what counts as a contribution worth valuing.
So we're going back to the impartial spectator that I mentioned of Adam Smith, this equilibrium between fellow feeling and self-love. So how do we go back to unravel? Because what we have created is a system, is an iron cage, as Max Weber would have said. So how do we fragilize the iron cage?
Yeah. Well, I think with all due respect to Adam Smith, I'm not sure that we should think of ourselves as impartial spectators, but rather as partial, embedded, situated, claimed selves and fellow citizens. Political deliberation, what we need is to find a way to reason together across our differences about big questions that citizens ought to be debating, such as, what does it mean to seek a just society? What contributions should we honor and reward? What should be the role and limits of markets in a good society? What should we do about rising inequality? What do we owe one another as fellow citizens? These are big questions of values. It's as if we've lost the art of democratic public discourse. Our public discourse is hollowed out morally. And this is partly because we've consigned so many questions about the common good and about contribution and how to value it to markets. And we've deferred, as a result, these fundamental civic questions to experts and technocrats who, as it turns out, often get it wrong. And I think part of the anger against experts and elites is partly to do with the meritocratic hubris I was describing, but I think it also has to do with how poorly they have governed. And so it's really the fundamental project, as I see it, is to reclaim these questions for democratic public deliberation.
I would have many more questions, but I had a big chance of spending half an hour with you before and asking you many questions, so I think I will open up for the room. And I'm sure that we are going to have mics that come, so many questions I can see already.
Yeah, hello. Thank you very much. My name is David, and it was very interesting to listen to your presentation. So you just said that we should reclaim the democratic deliberations to evaluate the contributions that different people have or do to our society, and reclaim them to be moral evaluations instead of maybe more financial evaluations. What I ask myself is, who would be doing these democratic deliberations? In our society at the moment, I guess it would be mainly the educated ones that take part in these deliberations, which brings us to the same problems that you've already pointed out. Yeah. It could also be the majority. That means we're still stuck with the problem of lack of public opinion. Or it could be by lot, which then, of course, also is due to luck. So how do you imagine this reclaiming taking place? Who would be deliberating? How can we discern who that would be?
Ideally, all democratic citizens. But you're right that not everyone exercises citizenship, and we need to create venues and forums and platforms that are inviting and accessible for all citizens if we're to rejuvenate the terms of public discourse. But it isn't merely an abstract exercise. I think it has to be prompted, such deliberation about how to value various social roles. It has to be prompted by concrete policy proposals. And let me give you one small example. Let's take the question of finance, which occupies a greater and greater share of the economy, or has come to in the last several decades. And yet it's not so clear that beyond a certain level, more financial activity actually increases the productivity of the economy. Never mind matters of justice and fairness. I mean just in terms of productivity. Those who study the contribution of increased financial activity to economic productivity in the real economy have, well, one such expert, Adair Turner, who was the head of the British Financial Regulatory Authority after the financial crash, he's estimated that the productive aspect of finance, investing in new productive activity, new companies, new factories, new plant and equipment, homes, roads, bridges, infrastructure, hospitals. The productive aspect of financial activity consists of about 15% only of financial activity, and the other 85%, he estimates, consists of essentially bets, speculative gambles on the future value of already existing assets. Well, if he's even roughly right, that raises a question whether all this financial activity really does contribute to the economy, to the productive economy. Here's a way we could frame that question politically. Suppose we considered a proposal to institute a financial transactions tax on speculative financial activity, and to use the proceeds of that tax to reduce the tax on labor, on work, on working people. Not only for the sake of shifting the burden of taxation from to those who can better afford it. That's an argument of distributive justice. But also as a way of prompting public debate about the true contribution of hedge fund managers, say, vis-a-vis school teachers and nurses. So this is the kind of concrete, practical question that can prompt a bigger philosophical debate about what contributions to the economy and to the common good we should really be valuing.
We have one question here. Maybe we take two questions each time because we have so many hands. So you can start. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I had a question with regards to when you were talking about merit, about the quality assumed in a given successful situation. So, for example, the quality of education when you receive successful admission, or the quality of a working job. For example, the quality of long-paid doctors or nurses, or even school teachers taking up more demand, the quality that this is kind of reassessed, especially during the COVID pandemic. People were wanting to be much more rewarded. I'm wondering, how does the quality of this reassessment, or this quality of this expectation? People are working retirement age, they're trying to push it because they want quality of a longer life that they have to enjoy and fulfill. So how does this idea play into the finding a common good?
Right, good. I'll try to give a briefer answer than I've been. All right. The short answer is this: the pandemic is a good example. Because during the pandemic, those of us who had the luxury of working from home or studying from home couldn't help but notice how deeply we depend on workers we often overlook. Not only the hospital workers, but delivery workers, warehouse workers, grocery store clerks, childcare workers, truck drivers. These are not the best paid or the most honored workers in our societies, and yet during the pandemic, we began describing them as essential workers, as key workers. So, and we applauded them sometimes, at night. But this could be the beginning of a broader public debate about how to bring their pay and recognition into better alignment with the importance of the work they do. Now, whether we take that opportunity or fall back in our old assumptions, that's up to us. But that's the way in which the experience of the pandemic could prompt a broad rethinking of social value and recognition and reward.
Oh my God. Yes.
Yes, thank you so much. I've been interested in your work for a while, and this issue of the meritocracy and also of opportunity hoarding of the upper middle, of the cultural and intellectual elite. And I'm sure you're familiar with the work of James and Deborah Fallows when they did Our Towns, and they flew around to medium-sized small towns in the United States and talked with people about local issues and the call for the local. As the elites, we gravitate to elite institutions, we gravitate to elite cities, to elite locations, and we lose contact with the local. And I dropped out of elite education and took a 30-year hiatus in a rural area. All of my cohort from my elite bachelor's degree are now lawyers and professors in elite institutions. They're not happier at all. And the people that I've lived with in my local rural area in France, who are roofers and farmers, they're happier people. They're more fulfilled in a lot of ways. And I think we lose track of that, and then we find ourselves in these very competitive environments. And I think it's James Fallows' work, asking people political questions on the local level. How does your library work? How is the sewage system managed? People are involved, and when we're not talking about polarizing questions, people work together a lot better. And I think just wanted to say thank you again for the work.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate and welcome that observation about the importance of listening to not just coastal or metropolitan elites, but the voices of people who lead very fulfilling and meaningful lives that are not bound up with the competitive exertions and strivings of the professional classes. Thank you for that.
We'll take one question here on this side. Try to be fair.
Justice here.
Thank you. It was an honor listening to you. I'm Bhavya. I wanted to ask, how would you situate this argument against meritocracy in the context of non-Western democracies like India, where the demography of the parliamentarians doesn't necessarily fit into this picture, where they come from elite institutions, but we might be facing some similar problems.
Do you think that meritocracy is more or less intense in India than in the United States and Europe?
I won't say more intense, but I do think it's heading that way.
What about the ITTs? Do you think those are intensely competitive, meritocratic institutions?
The IITs? The IITs?
IITs, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Yes.
I do think they are intensely. Competitive, but again, our parliamentarians are not coming from those institutions.
Right. And am I right in thinking that there are reservations and quotas in the Indian Parliament?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that points to one possible response to the radically unequal representation I was describing. It may not be the best response for all societies, but it's one that should be considered. It's not by accident that the Indian Parliament has broader occupational and class representation. It's by deliberate design and political choice, which suggests there may be a range of ways of trying to achieve greater diversity in terms of class and educational background and occupational background and gender and ethnicity in parliaments and legislatures. And the Indian case offers one such example. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you for your response.
Yeah. One question here. Yeah.
So, thank you very much for the presentation. And you mentioned multiple times that we should have specific policy ideas to get behind. You've mentioned how education and access to higher education should be rethinked, or how a financial transaction taxes could be an interesting idea. I was wondering if you had any other specific policy ideas that you would have concerning, what would help to reinvigorate or the society.
Okay.
Are there any other ideas, basically?
Thank you for that. Here's one that's controversial and that hasn't gotten very far, about higher education. It's about admitting students to the competitive American universities. And what I propose is a lottery, not a random lottery, but I call it a lottery of the qualified. So, for example, Harvard and Stanford in the United States get way more well-qualified applicants than they can possibly admit. They now get about 50,000 applicants each year for about 2,000 places in the first-year class. A small percentage of those who apply are not qualified, but quite a large percentage are very well qualified to do the work, to do it well, to benefit from the education, to contribute to the education of their fellow students. So my proposal is to winnow out those who are not qualified and would not benefit and would not be capable of doing high-level university work. And among the rest, how many would there be? I don't know. Maybe there would be 30,000 or 25,000 or 20,000 for those 2,000 seats. Among the rest, admit by lottery. Well, so I propose that in the book, The Tyranny of Merit, and I can't say that my university has embraced that proposal, but there would be another example.
Yeah, that would be.
Do
quite
you like that
interesting.
idea?
Yeah. Let me think about it.
That's a very diplomatic answer.
No, but I mean, it does connect with quite a number of discussions about that, because indeed the selection process sometimes we can discuss those,
yeah.
Indeed. I think that there's one question online. Maybe we will take it, Laurence?
Yes, thank you, Marie-Laure, and thank you, Professor Sandel, for this presentation on a timely topic, especially in this academic environment. We have about 170 people online following the event, and I have one question. So, to what extent does the extensive measurement of inequality and the meritocracy discourse help avoid discussing the systematic racism that is the root cause of the current societal structure?
Well, racism is right at the heart of the injustice and the inequality that we're struggling with. There's no question about that. And racism and xenophobia are an important part of the political appeal of the right-wing populist figures I was referring to, including Donald Trump, including figures like Marine Le Pen in France, the woman who's likely to win the Italian election, and so on. So it would be a mistake to ignore the role of racism and xenophobia in animating the support for right-wing populist politicians and political parties. My argument is that important a factor as racism and xenophobia are, they're not the only source of the grievances that are fueling these movements. And there's a temptation by mainstream politicians and political parties to assume or to maintain that it's all about racism and xenophobia and misogyny and so on. That's too comfortable, because it lets those mainstream politicians off the hook for the policies they enacted that led to the inequality, economic inequality, and the meritocratic hubris that has been a tremendous source of the grievance against elites that these politicians, including Trump, appeal to. After one primary election victory in 2016, Donald Trump proclaimed what seemed to be a strange boast. He said, "I love the poorly educated," because he knew that he was drawing support from those, as he did overwhelmingly win support of those without a university degree. And the Democratic Party won the support of those with advanced degrees and with college degrees. This is a reversal from the traditional pattern of partisan allegiances. And it's true not only in the United States, but also in Britain and in France, where it used to be that the better educated, the well-educated classes voted for the conservative parties. They tended to be more affluent, and they went with the conservatives. And working people voted for the Democratic Party back in Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, and for the Labour Party in Britain, and for the Socialist Party in France. Working people were the base of support. But this is flipped now. It's flipped because of the educational divide and the way in which these center-left parties and social democratic parties have alienated working people. So it's important to take account of that, in addition to the racism and the xenophobia that fuel support for right-wing populist figures.
Indeed. In France, actually, the Socialist Party died, but that's another thing.
Yeah.
We're going to take one question here.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Professor, for the lecture. My question is more with respect to the analytical aspect of your stances. And the question is, when you make the stance that universities are sort of vetting mechanisms and so on, what does that add to our understanding in comparison to, say, the Foucauldian stance that public bodies and institutions are vessels through which a social class asserts control and dominance over other social classes? So in terms of analytical value, and forgive my skepticism, can you elaborate on how that contributes to our understanding? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the skepticism is well placed, because my emphasis on universities becoming sorting machines for a meritocratic society, I see as compatible with Foucault's insight, and an instance of it that has special relevance insofar as we live in a meritocratic age where economic privilege and political advantage and power flow to, well, put it this way, where the class divides that matter are increasingly defined by educational credentials. So I think that my emphasis on the way in which universities have become sorting machines for a market-driven meritocratic society is entirely compatible with Foucault's general emphasis on the way in which politically strategic institutions do reflect and entrench class differences. But it's worth noticing that this isn't just any class difference. It's one that's now increasingly defined by credentials, and hence my emphasis on meritocracy and meritocratic hubris.
So that's where I would need the lottery, I guess, for the last question. How are we going to do this? Okay, I'll let you pick.
I have the mic. You outsourced the judgment about it.
Outsourced the lottery.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to have the last question. It was a lottery to get the last question. So, Professor, I found your speech very, very interesting, and you so aptly pointed towards meritocracy as having such a causal impact on the breakdown on civic discourse. But a few months ago, we were also honored to have a Nobel Prize winner, Maria Ressa, come and give us a similar speech. But rather than pointing to meritocracy as causing a breakdown in civic discourse, she rather pointed to the role that social media companies and algorithms were having, particularly in her home country of the Philippines. And I would just be very interested to hear your opinion on that, and how it seems as though social media is really even removing the preconditions for forming a public sphere in a Habermasian sense.
Definitely the lottery works. This is a great question.
Yeah, it is a great question. I agree that social media, the way it works, is antithetical to the creation of the kind of public sphere that I think we need to rejuvenate democracy. It reinforces the divisions that we've been discussing. I think we can't give an adequate account of how society, conceived as a divide between winners and losers, arose and so deeply polarized us without looking back at least 4 decades before social media was on the scene, which is why I emphasize neoliberal globalization and meritocratic notions of success as the 2 deep sources of the polarization that now casts a shadow over our civic life. But I certainly agree that if we're asking ourselves, as I think we should be, how can we find our way to a better, morally more robust kind of public discourse than the kind to which we've become accustomed, social media is an obstacle. Social media as it currently exists. because it makes money. The social media companies make money precisely by targeting news feeds and ultimately advertising in accordance with what people already think and believe and want. And that's at odds with the project of creating a more robust public sphere, of constituting public places and common spaces of shared democratic citizenship, where we can gather, whether in person or online, where we can gather to reason together and argue together about our differences. Social media thrives on reinforcing and profiting from those differences, rather than mediating them or creating platforms for the kind of public debate and deliberation that I think democracy today desperately requires. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.